All right, this morning let's turn to chapter 10 of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 10. Chapter 10 is going to reinforce some of the previous implied thoughts, specifically that wisdom is better than foolishness. Solomon, the preacher here, has come to a conclusion that, if I can't tell you anything else, if I can't tell you what comes tomorrow, if I can't even tell you necessarily the reason why everything happens that happens, what he did feel confident enough in portraying here is that foolishness still brings a miserable existence. This chapter is going to give great attention to the harm that a fool brings on himself and on to others. So again, of all the questions, of all the confusion that maybe existed in some of the previous chapters, he still believes and still feels extremely confident that the pursuit of wisdom and a wise, discretionary pursuit of life is better than just the foolishness, the folly that seems to pervade the society then and now, of course. Let's just go through these things here. We'll go verse by verse. Dead flies, verse 1, cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. And so doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor. Just as flies, if a fly were to get caught and die in the ointment, it would give then it off a stink, right? It would give off a foul odor. You would expect perfume to smell good. You would expect the ointment that you've invested money in, that you've invested much effort into obtaining, you would expect that to continue to produce a good smell. Well, you would also expect a wise man or a person that was in reputation for honor, for dignity, for wisdom, as it says here. You've come accustomed to what to expect from them. But just as a dead fly in the ointment can put off a stinking smell, so it says, does a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor. Folly can ruin a man's reputation. Small acts of foolishness can really harm a guy's reputation. You can have someone who has a testimony or a reputation of wisdom and honor. And those are things that take a long time to produce. Those can take years to build up a character testimony that people trust, that is viewed as wise, that is viewed as honorable, and yet very quickly throw in some foolishness, throw in some folly, and now that reputation is tarnished. Similarly, once there are dead flies in the ointment, and you've smelled it and think, whoo, that stinks, you're probably not going to go back to that well too many more times, right? You've looked at it now as, nope, that stuff stinks, it's not worth using, we'll find something else. Here's a guy that's lived in wisdom and lived in honor, and through a little bit of folly mixed in has ruined his reputation, and now that's his reputation, right? He could try to build it back up through wisdom and honor again, yet there will still always be that one degree of people that think this guy's foolish. Just as Brother John fairly recently preached from the book of Proverbs, and how a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, Solomon has a similar thought here in telling us that a little folly thrown in with wisdom and honor, that's going to cause a stink. You are going to see that a lot here in chapter 10, that he's not necessarily always quoting word for word, but there are many references in Ecclesiastes 10 that mirror similar things that he said in the book of Proverbs. In verse 2, it says that a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart at his left. Now, you don't necessarily have to read too far into that. I mean, this verse kind of speaks to the historical view of the right hand versus the left. Okay, it's not just 2022 that is viewed as left-handed people being the oddballs, right? Historically, the historical view was that the right arm was more common. It represented the strength. It represented the more dexterous ability. The left was a little more awkward, right? The right hand is the place of strength. And a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left. Yea, also, when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he is a fool. And what's that verse say? Well, that basically tells us that the problem with a fool is that he cannot hide it. Someone who's a fool, it mentions here that he's just walking by the way. It doesn't mention that he's involved in any kind of complicated activity. It doesn't mention any strenuous task that he's trying to perform. Here's a fool that's walking by the way. His wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he is a fool. Here's just a fool that's walking by the way, and yet by something that he says or that he does, he just lets everyone know that he's a fool. People that have a habit, a reputation for continuous folly or foolishness, lack of sincerity, lack of discipline, lack of seriousness, it's all over them, right? And they can't hide it. You ever been around someone who never knew how to temper their behavior in the right setting? No matter where they're at, no matter the setting, they always end up doing something to try and draw attention to themselves. And it gets to the point where maybe they're not even trying anymore. That's just their habit. That is just their lifestyle now, is that they're loud, they're obnoxious, they draw attention to themselves, they don't know how to temper behavior in the right setting. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 13, he puts it in a little bit of an interesting way here. Proverbs chapter 13, Proverbs 13, verse 16 says, every prudent man dealeth with knowledge, but a fool layeth open his folly. It deals with spreading, right? To lay open means to spread. A prudent man, or one of discretion, deals with knowledge, but when you deal with a fool, that's just spread out before everyone. A fool has a very hard time concealing his folly. The prudent, the wise, they deal with discretion. They do know how to temper their behavior. But the fool, he can't hide it. He's walking by the way, just in his daily, normal, everyday tasks. He will do something or say something that reveals himself to be the fool he is. And you and I have seen that, right? You ever been in a situation or where someone has told you a story? Someone says, hey, did you hear about something, this happened, or I saw somebody do this, and you right away knew who it was. Because that's just their habit. That's just the kind of person that they are. Solomon's like, listen, foolishness, you're going to have a hard time hiding that. If you spend a life that's pursuing not wisdom, but folly and insincerity, no serious approach to life, that will wear down, not just your testimony, it'll wear down the others that are around you. They will be able to see that you are a fool. Ecclesiastes 10 verse 4 says, if the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses. A wise man prudently takes anger or anything else that comes his way, especially from those that are his superiors, those that are above him. It speaks here of the ruler. The wise man knows that it's better to ease tension than to egg it on, to intensify it, to exaggerate it, to one-up it. And it's better to pacify the ruler. Now, a fool doesn't do that. A fool only knows how to escalate things, right? A fool will take this kind of situation where the spirit of the ruler has risen up, where, A fool isn't even smart enough to see that his boss or the ruler is angry and think to himself, you know what, now's not a good time. Or, you know what, just take it, absorb it. No, the fool doesn't have the sense or the ability to do that. The fool huffs off. The fool is he's never going to be acquainted with meekness or submission or humility, a humble attitude. You can see here that Solomon is drawing a line where basically you've got wisdom and prudence on this side, but a fool, there is no sense of humility or submission or, being contemplative of the scenario. In the book of Proverbs, again, Proverbs chapter 25. Proverbs chapter 25 and verse number 15, by long forbearing is a prince persuaded, and a soft tongue breaketh the bone. Now Solomon is king. Solomon, in a sense, is speaking from experience here as well, because he could tell you that you want to persuade the ruler, whether you want to be on his good side, you want to have influence in him and over him. There is a way to pursue that. There is a way to do that. The way that you influence people that are over you is not by a quick, a huff, a prideful and arrogant spirit or an attitude. Now that would go for certainly Solomon as a king, as a ruler. I think about that in relation to work, the relationship at work with those that are above me, your bosses. We could think about this in regards to the home, right? Our families. The way that you deal with those that are over you, the attitude with which you respond will go a long way with how that relationship develops. It's going to go a long way with your future influence in those. And a fool can't see that. A fool always gets wrapped up in the here and the now and the not being able to see that, a little bit of humility, a little bit of submission, a little bit of even just taking it, even if taking it wrongly, that to ease the tension in a situation is often a lot wiser than you having to get your word in, than you having to escalate it or to take it to the next extreme level. So if the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place. Don't huff off, don't blast off. Yielding pacifieth great offenses. And the wise man sees that where the fool doesn't. Now, one person that you would always hope would be wise would be the people in authority, right? You would hope that it's so. Whether it be the parent, whether it be the boss, whether it be the president, whether it be the king, you would hope that the people that are in charge, that the people that are in authority would be wise. Now, it's not always the case. Notice verse number 5. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. Again, I would like to think that you could count on wise decisions from those that are in charge. Those that are in charge don't always make wise decisions. Foolishness isn't just a message or a lesson for the lowest of the low. You that are the subjects, or you that are the children, or you that are just the employee and not the boss. Wisdom and prudence is for you. Actually, wisdom and prudence is for everyone. People that are in charge don't always make the right decision. It tells us here that folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. It often happens that men are promoted or appointed to positions when they don't have suitable qualifications. And it's been seen that capable men often continue to trudge around in the lower positions. Those things happen, You wouldn't like to think that it was so. You wouldn't think that that's the best way to operate, but it happens, right? Sometimes even those that are higher up make foolish decisions. He says in verse 7, I've seen servants upon horses and princes walking as servants upon the earth. Now you read verse 7 and you and I both know that sounds totally backwards to everything that you would expect to see in the situation, right? You would expect that if there are horses, who would be riding on them? Well, you would expect the princes to be riding upon. You would expect the servants to be walking. But sometimes things actually are about as backwards as you expect them to be. Not everything turns out by way of what we would expect. I've seen servants upon horses and princes walking as servants upon the face of the earth. Again, it just sounds backwards, but it does go to show you that foolishness exists across all spectrums. Okay? This is not a king that is ripping on all of the subjects of a lower state, forcing them into wisdom and into submission because he's king. No, Solomon has seen across the spectrum that once foolishness pervades, it turns everything upside down. And even those that should be making wise decisions do not always make wise decisions. And when you don't, you can get an outcome that looks about as backwards as the prince walking on the earth and the servants riding upon the horse. Okay? If you look at our society, if you look at our world, and sometimes things look about as backwards as they really should be, you can count on it that there, you know what? Foolishness exists. Foolishness is a problem. Wise decision making is a problem that exists across all spectrums, all types of people. Verse number 8 says, He that diggeth a pit shall fall into it. And whoso breaketh an hedge, a serpent shall bite him. The fool is often not wise enough to see that the things that he do toward the hurt of other are going to return upon him, right? The fool very rarely sees and understands God's economy, whereby that which is sown is that which is reaped, right? Whatsoever man sows, that shall he also reap. And it doesn't tell us here what his motives are. You know, maybe his motive for breaking a hedge was to allow an intruder in. Maybe his motive for breaking a hedge was to, one of the things that's referenced in the Old Testament is the moving of landmarks. You know, if you break down somebody's hedge and can move it to another location, you can shorten their land by at the same time increasing yours. We don't know what his motive is, but it's obvious that these things are done in the intent to hurt, to influence or to hurt another. And the fool's just not even smart enough or wise enough to realize that those things do return upon him. Proverbs 26 in verse 27, he had said something very similar to this. In Proverbs 26 verse 27, it says, Whoso diggeth a pit shall fall therein, and he that rolleth a stone, it will return upon him. You're not going to get away with anything. You know, the foolish person dreams and schemes and plans and think that he's just got this perfect plan whereby he's going to come out on top, but he's a fool, so he doesn't even see all of the outcomes. He doesn't see how these things could return upon himself, right? The fool is very narrow-sighted. He's not very contemplative of all the outcomes and doesn't see that, by digging a pit for him, I'm going to be the one that ends up getting stuck. Or that by destroying his hedge, I'm going to do irreparable harm to myself in turn. He's just not able to see that. Okay, the fool is not very conscious of all the potential outcomes and certainly does not consider himself in a similar situation. Whereas actually, the wise deal with prudence, wisdom, caution. It says here in verse 9, Whoso removeth stones shall be hurt therewith, and he that cleaveth wood shall be endangered thereby. These are simple tasks, right? But he talks about potentially the dangers that could exist in even the most normal of existing tasks, right? The dealing with stones, moving stones, cleaving wood, chopping down a tree, all of those things there are potential dangers to. Now, obviously, the context here in dealing with the wise versus the foolish is that one will deal with such with prudence, and one won't even take the precautions or the consideration toward those things. As verse 10 says, if the iron be blunt, and he do not whet the edge, then must he put to more strength. Work with sharp tools. You say, well, he just told you how dangerous it is to cut down trees, the potential dangers that rise. Why would he tell you to then sharpen the axe, make the situation more dangerous? Well, the wise and the prudent take caution in all of those things, but they also deal with the project that's in front of them with wisdom. The wise man sees, he knows, he understands that it takes more labor to get the job done when you deal with blunt-edged tools, right? You deal with an axe that's not at all sharp, you're going to spend twice as much time, cutting logs. The amount of time that you spend or invest in sharpening the axe is more than compensated by the amount of time that is saved in the ease of the project. I was reading one man, Leopold, said, wisdom prepares the way to success. The wise man is able to sit and consider. He considers the danger. He considers what it is to be prudent in the project and what it is to be wise in the project. And he sharpens his tools and he prepares in every way to make the project a success. You get the idea that a foolish man doesn't consider. He just gets in there and he starts swinging. From verse 9, he hasn't considered the dangers. And from verse 10, he hasn't considered what will make the project a success. He'll get in and just start swinging with a dull, blunt axe. And Solomon here is just ripping on, just giving a harder time to the fool. You start, you're 10 verses in, and you get the opinion Solomon just doesn't have time anymore for fools, that these guys can't do anything right. They'll make themselves known as fools. You can't trust them. You can't depend on them. They don't have any clue what they're doing. He has very, very little time for those that have no concerns other than just the pursuit of folly. No serious approach to life at all. Again, when he talks about folly or foolishness, he's not talking per se about individual acts of foolishness. We all have those. Every one of us have individual times where foolishness pervades our life, right? Now from verse 1, he tells you got to be careful about that, because even a guy that's known for wisdom and folly, you mix in the right amount of foolishness, or you mix in a particular act of foolishness, and it'll ruin their reputation. But he's talking about those, obviously, they're fools. They just don't care. There is no serious view of life. And as much as Solomon has told us by now, I don't know what the meaning of life is, and I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, and I can't tell you why, but he has at least discovered that wisdom is still the best pursuit. If nothing else, the wisdom, he's talking to him here about in verse 9 and 10, just your normal everyday activities, the projects that men are involved in. And here he's, the fool makes it twice as hard on himself because the guy just won't sharpen his axe. Verse 11, surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. The fool always talks about what he's going to do, right? The fool always has big plans, all of the things that he's going to do. Now, he starts off this next conversation by saying, surely the serpent will bite without enchantment. What good is a snake charmer if the serpent has already bitten. Or if a snake charmer, if the charmer is not there to charm the snake, if he is not there to do what his required task is, what good is he? Well, and what good is he for all of the talk and all the abilities that he says he could do? You know, it doesn't do me any good to talk about how great of a snake charmer that I am if when the time comes to charm the snake, I'm late and the snake bites. I mean, the snake's going to bite without enchantment. And he speaks about how a babbler is no better. So in preface of the next talk, he's introduced that he's going to be talking about the babbler. The fool is one who loves to talk, loves to hear himself talk, loves to talk about all of the things that he's going to do. You ever meet someone that they've got big plans, and this is what they're going to do, and this is how great it's going to be when they get it done, and how talented they are and how gifted they are, and they're always tooting their own horn about themselves and their ambitions and their plans. Now let's read what he says about that. The words of a wise man's mouth, verse 12, they are gracious, but the lips of a fool will swallow up himself. The mouth of a fool will get himself in trouble. The words of a wise man's mouth, they are gracious. They lend themselves to grace, both from him and beg of grace and mercy from others. But the lips of a fool will swallow himself up. The words and the mouth of a fool is going to get him in a whole lot of trouble. Okay? It is really, really easy for our mouths to get us into trouble and to be our downfall. He speaks about how the fool has that problem. In verse number 13, the beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness. You ever meet someone that when they're talking and they're not wise, they would probably fall into the category of the fool here as Solomon is explaining it. But they're talking and they're just talking and talking. And at first it kind of just seems harmless, like, oh, well, so-and-so, that's what they do. They talk. But the more that they talk, and the more that they talk, and the more that they commit to, and the more that they say, and the more that they plan, and the worse and worse it gets. That is the impression that you get here from verse number 13, that the beginning of his words is foolishness, right? And you could write it off. Oh yeah, I'm used to dealing with so-and-so. That when they start, it's just foolishness. But the more that they talk, the end of his talk is mischievous madness. By the end, it becomes crazy, right? You ever deal with someone that they can't help but be the center of attention. They can't help but always be one that is talking. And it doesn't matter what you would say. There's always within them the degree of one-upping or exaggeration. They always have to have the most exaggerated story. They always have to have the focal point. They always have to have the attention. And sometimes it seems absolutely crazy. And that's what Solomon is saying here, that you deal with some people and at the beginning it's just like, ugh. I get it. That's a bunch of nonsense, but it's harmless nonsense. And then by the end, it's mischievous madness. By the end of talking with someone, you get like, are you crazy? There's no way that that's true. There's no way that that's actually happened. There's no way that actually will happen. I know you. There's no way that you're going to do all of these things that you're committing to. And it's just crazy. Verse 14, a fool also is full of words. He just can't stop, right? A fool doesn't know when to stop. And what Solomon says here, a man cannot tell what shall be and what shall be after him. Who can tell him? You get to the point where Solomon is tired of dealing with this person who has promised and committed and talked and talked and talked and talked, and he finally wants to say to him, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Why do you keep talking? Why do you keep up with all of the plans and the schemes and the commitments and all of this talk? He says a fool doesn't know when to stop. And one thing Solomon has discovered through all of his pursuits, through everything that he has tried so far, and we talked about this from the previous passages, no one knows what's going to happen, no one knows when it's going to happen, and no one knows why it might happen. And now that he has discovered that, he's able to sense the foolishness that pervades all when they greatly scheme and plan. And he deals with a fool here that just won't stop. He just keeps talking. And he says there in verse number 14, a fool also is full of words, but a man cannot tell what shall be, and what shall be after him, who can tell him? You ever deal with someone that just talks and they won't stop, and that's what you want to finally look at them and say, you don't have any better idea of what's happening tomorrow than I do. And you can sense Solomon now is really, it's like he can't even talk about foolishness. It's like he can't even talk about fools without getting upset. He is seeing that a pursuit of folly and of foolishness is very, very harmful. And it is in no way to be compared with the pursuit of prudence, wisdom, discretion, and wise decision making. Okay? Now here's a guy. Now I just remember to keep it in context and keep it in comparison with all the things that we've talked about so far. Here's a guy that over the last couple of chapters hasn't had any of the answers. Right? He's told us as such. I don't even know what to say. I don't have any of the answers as the whens and the whys and all of this. But now in chapter 10, he's waxing very strong with a very dedicated point that of all the things I don't know, here's what I do know, that a life that is spent in folly and carelessness, that's obnoxious. And that is not the pursuit of a wise man. Now in chapter 10 here, we read verse 12, verse 12, 13, 14, and how a fool's mouth gets him into trouble, right? Now he's going to be a little, poking fun is not the right way, but I want you to listen to the language that he's using here, because now he said, the fool talks, he talks greatly, he's got all these plans. I just want to look at him and say, you don't have any clue what's going to happen tomorrow, so why do you keep babbling on? And now verse 15, the labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go to the city. Sure, you have all these great plans, all these things that you're going to do. You haven't even left the county. You've never done anything. He says the fool has no way to, he doesn't even know how to go to the city. He's got all these great plans. He's got all these great ambitions. He says all these things he's going to do, all these great projects he's going to get involved in, and all the ways that he's going to do things. He's just going to change the world. And this guy doesn't even know how to go to the city. You know, we dealt some, you know, when we lived in Illinois, right? We had some folks that like that was reality for them. Like, these people have never left the county. This is this small, very little space, very, very little activity is all that they have ever known. And yet to speak with, the fool speaks with such great ambition of all the things that he is going to do. And Solomon says, what have you done? You don't even know how to go to the city. You know, you don't even have, doesn't know how to go to the city. Lastly, as he begins verse 16, you say, but doesn't foolishness just harm the fool? So what if somebody wants to spend their life in folly or lack of seriousness, lack of wisdom? Doesn't foolishness just harm the fool? Isn't it harmless to everybody else? And the answer to that is no. Look at verse 16. Woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child and thy princes eat in the morning. Pity the land whose leaders are immature. Pity the land here whose princes or legislators, they carouse in the morning instead of actually being diligent about their duties. They eat in the morning. Rather, verse 17, blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season for strength and not for drunkenness. Better is the land when the leaders are dignified, experienced, and busy about their work. Happy is the land when the leaders manifest a sense of propriety, a sense of self-control, and they are diligent about their business. They eat in due season, and they do so for strength and not for drunkenness. You know, foolishness at high levels, that's harmful to all those that have to endure, that have to live beneath them. No, foolishness and folly doesn't just harm the individual fool. He speaks here of leaders. He speaks of kings, rulers, princes, and how the things that they do ultimately has great impact on those that are under them. Verse 18, it doesn't necessarily just have to be rulers. It doesn't have to be governments that we talk about. Verse 18, by much slothfulness the building decayeth, and through idleness of hands the house droppeth through. You know, one man's folly, foolishness, ignorance, laziness. You say, well, that's just one man. But yeah, you know, who's living in his home? And through his lack of work and dedication and seriousness, wisdom and prudence, by laziness, he's allowed his house to crumble. And now everybody that lives in that house has to deal with it. A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. That generally is the thought in society, right? To throw some money at it and that'll fix it. That doesn't fix all problems. A man's life consists not of the abundance of things that he possesseth. Continued foolishness does cause the governments and the houses to crumble. And no matter the feast that's made, no matter how it is laughed off, and no matter how much money is thrown at it, you can't fix a fool. Okay? Curse not the king, verse 20. No, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber, for a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. The fool never sees and realizes that his mouth is going to get him in trouble. In the previous verses, it was all the things that he promised, all of the things that he committed to, all of the plans that he had. Now it's a different context. Now it is different things that he is saying. Now he's cursing the king, not knowing that, that's going to get back to him. The fool doesn't see that. The fool doesn't know who he's surrounded by. The fool doesn't know how to care and watch even the things that he says, and he allows his mouth to get him into so much trouble. Chapter 10 is kind of an oddity thus far among the last few chapters that we've looked at, because here Solomon is not he's not cautious. He's not laid back. He's not the guy that we've seen the last couple chapters that didn't know what to say, that didn't have the answers. Now, on the contrary, he is coming across as very strong, very, very much so, in that this, of all the things I didn't know, this is what I do know. And I have seen by experience that wisdom is the proper pursuit, that foolishness causes much, much heartache, both to those that are foolish, to those that are intimately involved with them, to those that are under them, to those that live in their houses. Foolishness is a great, great harm. Now, what he has told us for sure is that there is no guarantee. We understand that there's no guarantee that if you live your life in pursuit of wisdom, that would keep the bad things from happening to you. There's no guarantee that, yes, making wise decisions, pursuing those things that are right, having the right kind of attitude and spirit, there is no guarantee that will keep the things of this world from happening to you. But he does feel very strong that this is still the right way to live. This is still the best pursuit. The fool does nothing but bring harm to himself and do it 10 times over. And that's finally some good advice that we're starting to get from Solomon here. Solomon's not promising you that if you pursue wisdom, I can promise you that all of these things will happen to you. But what he has seen and experienced is that fools bring harm upon themselves time and time and time again. And it is not at all to be compared with the life that takes life seriously and that tries to pursue wisdom and good, fundamental, wise decision making. Okay? And that's really good advice. There are a lot of things here in chapter 10. He is basically taking this chapter to talk about fools and what he has seen that fools bring upon himself, upon themselves. But it's strong, it's good advice. The fool cannot help himself. He keeps talking. He won't stop talking. He doesn't consider those that are around him, those that are under him. And it's a problem everywhere, right? He talked about individuals. He's talked about rulers. He's talked about all classes of society. Wisdom and foolishness, okay? I cannot tell you that this pursuit will make life the best life ever because you'll never have any problems. But he says, yeah, you really should still pursue this path. Pursue the path of wisdom, right? Father, we're grateful to come today. We are thankful for your word. We are thankful